Okay guys, No Time to Die. Bond 25, the last outing for Daniel Craig as the eponymous secret agent. Now, it's been out since the 30th of September in the UK, and I feel it's time that I can discuss spoilers, so I will discuss a few key spoilers in this video. Because, I've had time to mull over it, like a good fine wine, and a fine blonde or a brunette next to that wine. I don't know why they would be there, but it just kind of made sense in that moment.
You have the nasty habit of surviving.
And yes, Bond finally took that villain's hint. He died. That was it. Plain and simple. At the end of No Time to Die, he just literally died. That's the one thing they've never done in a Bond film ever. I mean, they did it in You Only Live Twice, but it was a bait and switch because then after the opening titles finished rolling, Bond was back and safe at HQ in London. So it was just a way of faking his death. And I thought, are they going to do that here? But no, because clearly when these missiles are launched from a naval cruiser and they're coming towards him and you see him getting blown up, there is no way you can say afterwards, well, Bond, if somehow managed to find an underground silo and got away. There was no way he could do that. Now, I will say that one of the other things that I was quite surprised about, they introduced an actual, one of Bond's offspring is in the movie called Mathilde, who he had with Madeline Swan. But the funny thing is that I don't know, the thing is, I like her as a character, but she hid so many things from Bond. Like she said to Bond when Bond discovers the kid in her hideout, it's like, oh, that's not yours, blah, blah, blah. But Bond, I think, already knew that it was his kid because the blue eyes gave it away. And yes, you could argue any person with piercing blue eyes could be anyone's child, but Bond had this fatherly instinct. That was his own kid, so that was pretty cool. And she kind of bonded with him straight away, which I thought was, well, that was an intended use of the word bonded, but you get my drift. So we had that. That's fine. Rami Malek. Well, I know in discussions before he accepted the role as Safin, he said he did not want to play him a certain way that would reinforce a stereotype of villains. And, to be honest, Malik has played a stereotypical bad guy terrorist in 24. So I'm not sure why he doesn't want to include that in his topic of discussion. So I think he probably made a lot of demands before he signed on the dotted line that he wanted to play a certain type of villain. And to me, he's kind of the weakest part of the film. I did not really buy into him. He wasn't diabolical. He was cunning, but he wasn't on the same skill set as Bond as in tactical fighting. I was expecting him to be like, pull out these bag of skills like Liam Neeson does and just go toe-to-toe with Daniel Craig's Bond, but it didn't really end up that way. And yeah, the final confrontation, they're fighting Safin. So, this is the funny thing. I guess because Bond is so tired at this point that he kind of gets a bit careless. So Safin manages to get the upper hand on him by injecting him with a nanobot virus. So yeah, he says his goodbyes and everything else, and then he gets blown to smithereens. Now let's talk quickly about Nomi, as played by Lashana Lynch. I would say she wasn't even a necessary character to have in this series. Honestly, by the end of the movie, I won't even remember who she is. I won't remember her in 5 or 10 years' time. She's just very insignificant. If you'd taken her out of the picture, I think you could have had a tighter, more efficient Bond. But whenever she's there, she kind of messes up things, and Bond even has the upper hand with her, especially in Cuba. And then afterwards when he's kind of giving her that quip about, oh, does that bother you that you can't come in here with me and M? So it's one of those things that, why was she in the film? I know why she was meant to be in the film. And it's kind of like, you've already got Naomi Harris's Moneypenny. That should be enough, right? You don't have to kind of keep going down this route of we need to be as diverse as possible. Yeah, one other thing that I want to discuss is the length of this movie, 2 hours and 43 minutes. That's going to take anybody with a strong constitution to sit through this movie. And what I will say is, I think it was a wasted opportunity. Sam Mendes in Skyfall, he did the right thing. He was able to pay homage to the legacy in ways that no one was expecting. And I thought he did that perfectly. Now, Danny Boyle, who was meant to be the original director for this movie, now if I believe what my friend said to me yesterday, he wanted to introduce the idea that Bond doesn't die. He kind of regenerates like Doctor Who. I might have misunderstood what he told me yesterday, but it was something along those lines, hence why he was fired and they replaced him with Fukunaga. But 2 hours and 43 minutes, it's your last outing as Bond. You should be going, well, he did go out with a bang, I get that, not the kind of bang I thought it would be, But, well, yes, because Christmas comes once every year. If you get that Bond reference, then you're awesome. Look at Casino Royale. Despite that length, it was fantastic from start to finish. It was riveting. But here, you never get a real sense of why things are happening the way they are. Safin, again, one of the worst villains in a Bond movie. Just didn't really buy into his act. He's like a spoilt millennial brat who you just want to punch in the face. Cut the running time and then just make it a bit more personal. I think the film, because the pacing, it does have problems. I think the first half of the movie, like after Cuba, that's when it kind of goes a little bit off pace, off kilter. And I don't know, it's just one of those things that I have a problem with, which probably means actually at the very end, I wouldn't watch this movie again. I'm supposed to be watching it again at some point. I think it's the 16th of October. But after that, I don't really want to see it again. I'm kind of like done and dusted now. There was a guy sat next to me, and at the very end of the film, he was in tears. Bond dies. Well, there is that. But he said, to quote his phrase, they stabbed me in the back. Okay, like, chill out, dude. Like, it's just a film, it's just a character. I think he understood what I was saying. His reaction, I understood it, but everybody kind of stayed behind in the cinema to see that famous phrase, James Bond will return, will roll up at the end, and it did. I was a bit worried at first about what's going to happen because Amazon, they've paid for half of MGM. The other half is controlled by Barbara Broccoli and her half-brother Michael Wilson, okay, through their Eon Productions, Everything or Nothing, which is great. It's a good solid foundation. And speaking of solid foundations, the one thing that Barbara Broccoli has stated categorically that Bond will always be controlled by them. It's like an ironclad agreement, and then nothing's going to take that away. So I'm kind of curious that I presume that part of the deal is that Amazon will get to stream Bond films eventually, like the older titles, the legacy titles on their platform. But in terms of like doing spin-offs and everything else, because that's under the Broccolis and the Wilsons umbrella. Now, you could reset Bond in the 60s. A popular theory I've actually heard is that you could get Michael Fassbender to play him. And that would be good, but I think Fassy's past it now, that he would actually be able to play a convincing Bond at a young age, because they've got to make Bond young again, like somebody in their 30s perhaps, or beginning of 30s, so they've got that 10-year stage to mature and really get into that role. I think the other thing is as well, like with the Daniel Craig films, is that there's no sense of a mission. It does feel like an episode of 24 in some ways, where he has to stop this thing from happening, but you don't feel that anything's at stake. I love Casino Royale. That was a great film. Skyfall, it's the same thing again. It's all set in London for the most part, and like the final confrontation's up in Scotland, in his homeland, which kind of makes sense where he came from, his ancestry and all that stuff. But it's not like if you go back to, say, Pierce Brosnan and GoldenEye or the Timothy Dalton movies, where there was actually real world stakes to be had. But in the Daniel Craig films, they're all smaller, tighter knit affairs. I don't think they were a detriment to the series, but, as Bond fans I've spoken to, they kind of feel this is not the Bond they signed up for, even though they think Daniel Craig is really, really good. So when they go back to rebooting Bond, maybe go back to some of the source material, like The Man with the Golden Gun, because the film is completely different from the book. In the book, Bond gets brainwashed and goes back to London to kill M, and it's just, that's what I want to see. Have like a Manchurian Candidate type of Bond. I think that would be fantastic. But revisit the source materials, give us a bloodier, more brutal Bond, still with the funny one-liners and the quips, but stick them, take it from Ian Fleming's literature. Do that, and that's probably a good way of taking the character forward. Just don't inject politics into it. Just make it a straightforward Bond, but just realign it for today's way of thinking. Because if you're going to watch these films back in 50 years' time or whatever, you want them to stand the test of time. So, there are some of the older Bond films that I've seen. I think, oh God, I wouldn't have that in today, or that's just a bit too gratuitous. Do you know what I mean? So even I can actually point at the faults in some of the films. And funny enough, the faults that I point at in some of those films are my least favourite Bond films anyway, so that probably will say something. So I do wish the Broccolis the best of luck with what they do with the franchise next. I think they'll probably make an announcement maybe in a couple of years' time, or maybe at the end of next year. I'll make a bold prediction. Who would play Bond? Who knows? Maybe Ben Bond. He would be a good choice. Really, the guesses are really open to anybody. I don't know what the bets are at Ladbrokes, but my time is done here with this video. If you enjoyed it today, give it a like, maybe subscribe if you want to, and I will catch you on my next video. And yes, I hope you're digging the green screen behind me as well. I just thought I'd have a, just a bit more illumination.
The original action-adventure hero, James Bond.